Good afternoon. Welcome to the first in our new webinar series, Sam Rayburn History, a joint effort of the Sam Rayburn Museum and the Sam Rayburn House State Historic Site. We encourage you to mark your calendars for the third Thursday of each quarter at 2 p.m. and join us for an in-depth look at a different aspect of Sam Rayburn's life, career, and lasting legacy. Today, we will be exploring Rayburn and his district. I am Stacy Flood, Assistant Site Manager for the Sam Rayburn House State Historic Site, one of 32 sites owned and operated by the Texas Historical Commission.
And I am Emma Trent, Program Coordinator for the Sam Rayburn Museum, one of 4 locations of the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History, University of Texas at Austin.
We are also joined by Kim Burpo, Site Manager at the Sam Rayburn Museum. She's working behind the scenes, keeping us on track and monitoring any questions you might have. To ask a question, simply type it into the Q&A window, and at the end of the program, Kim will pass those along to us for a Q&A session. Now, without any further ado, we'll get started.
When Sam Rayburn won his first congressional election in 1912, the 4th Congressional District of Texas was made up of 5 counties: Grayson, Fannin, Collin, Hunt, and Rains. Located in northeast Texas with 2 counties bordering Oklahoma along the Red River, the district was a dense agricultural area consisting mainly of small communities and farms. Congressional redistricting in 1934 led to the addition of 2 more counties, Kaufman and Rockwall, but their inclusion did little to change the overall characteristics of Rayburn's district and his constituency. 1934 was the only time the boundaries of the 4th Congressional District were changed during Rayburn's tenure. Agriculturally, Rayburn's district focused primarily on growing cotton, but also saw steady production of wheat, hay, oats, and sorghum. There was very little industry, and as a result, the district boasted only 4 towns with populations greater than 10,000 throughout Rayburn's congressional career, the largest being Sherman in Grayson County. A lower family income level, as well as a lower level of education compared to the state average, were also attributed to the lack of big business in the district. The agricultural identity of the district suited Rayburn perfectly. He had grown up on a farm in Fannin County, so he understood the difficulties farmers faced and the ways in which their lives needed to improve. His knowledge of the land set him apart from other candidates and created a sense of partnership between himself and his constituents, which also gave Rayburn the political stability essential to bring about change.
The Rayburns built their family farm in 1916, just 3 years after Rayburn began his career in the House of Representatives. It's unlikely that he understood at the time how the Rayburn home would help him form a connection with his constituents, because his new undertaking wasn't just a token representation of his constituency. Farming was in his blood. Almost every legislative break saw Rayburn return to the family farm, where he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. At home, Rayburn could often be found working in his garden, tending his cattle, or chopping wood, but he always had time to talk to his people. When Congress is in session, your place is in Washington. When it is not in session, your place is home in your district, was advice he often gave newly elected legislators. Bonham Rayburn and Washington Rayburn were 2 completely different people. In D.C., he was Congressman Sam Rayburn, and he dressed the part in his suit, tie, and bowler hat. Speaker Rayburn had a car and driver, attended balls and presidential inaugurations, and hobnobbed with politicians and celebrities. But at home, he was plain old Mr. Sam. He worked the farm in his khakis or overalls, drove to the ranch in his beat-up farm truck, and had an open door policy with his friends and constituents. That open door policy was one of the few similarities between Rayburn's two personas. Even in Washington, he always had time to talk to the people he represented. He was known to cancel appointments when visitors from the 4th District showed up, unannounced, in his Capitol office, so he could dine with them and give them a personal tour of the Capitol before offering them the use of his car and chauffeur during their stay. It's debatable if the Rayburn brothers knew their farm would play host to thousands of people throughout Sam's tenure in Congress, but over the course of his 45 years at the home place, all were welcomed. From the humblest farmer to the President of the United States, Mr. Sam received all his visitors warmly. The only difference was which door they entered. While dignitaries were greeted at the front door, Mr. Sam followed the Southern custom of leaving the back door unlocked for friends and family to enter, and he counted all members of his district in that category. If he couldn't be found working outdoors during daylight hours, Rayburn was in the home sitting room, where he was always happy to lend an ear. He insisted that the family's cook, Bobby Phillips, keep a pot of coffee ready at all hours, for you never knew when someone would drop by. After the Rayburn Library opened in 1957, Mr. Sam would meet with visitors in the replica speaker's office there. As much as Rayburn was devoted to his district and loved to be among his constituents, after becoming speaker, he couldn't spend as much time as he would like at home, because with his new position came new responsibilities. This was especially true after the U.S. entered World War II, and Congress had to handle everything that goes along with the country in wartime. Even as he spent less time in his district, Rayburn remained devoted to serving them, especially if he heard of something that would benefit his people. He quickly realized his elevated position gave him more power to achieve things he might not have been able to before. A perfect example of this is the construction of the National Guard Armory in Bonham. Some members of the Chamber of Commerce had visited Rayburn at home to discuss the difficulty they were having in getting an armory built. The regulations stated that to have an armory, a city must have a full National Guard unit, and Bonham did not. Rayburn pulled a few speaker strings, and about a month later, the regulations had changed, and Bonham was on the schedule to get an armory.
A fundamental way that all congressmen serve their districts while in Washington is through constituent correspondence, often referred to as constituent case files. Rayburn received hundreds of letters from constituents requesting assistance, and he was committed to answering every letter he received. Whether it was offer help, tell them their request was forwarded along to the appropriate office, or simply answer a question about upcoming legislation, Rayburn read and responded to every letter, usually signing each one personally. Rayburn understood just how powerful a handwritten note could be, saying, "Always be sure to answer letters from your district, especially those written in longhand on a piece of tablet paper. That kind of person really needs help, and he'll never forget it. He will be your friend the rest of his life." He also maintained ties with his district while he was away through an astonishing amount of personal correspondence. Countless sympathy cards, congratulatory missives, and letters of appreciation were sent out over the years. Mr. Sam stayed active in his community, opening festivities at the Kukulahan Ranch Rodeo, speaking at graduation ceremonies, or just enjoying the exhibits at the Fannin County Fair. Regardless of whether he was participating in a parade or visiting the local feed store, the people of Bonham, and really his whole district, appreciated the fact that Mr. Sam was a plain-spoken Texas boy, much like themselves.
The mutual respect between Rayburn and his district came from many years of Mr. Sam being a true advocate for his people. As he said, "I think that a member of Congress in the House of Representatives is primarily elected to reflect the sentiment of that one district. He has got to do that, or they have got to have faith enough to believe that he can do that, or they take him out. And it was rare for Rayburn to push legislation that may have countered the will of the people of the 4th Congressional District. However, he also believed that if a man can't lead the sentiment of his district, he's in trouble. One such place Rayburn felt it was imperative to try to lead his constituents down a different path was civil rights. He believed that under the Constitution, every man has a right to vote. However, the Democratic Party line and his conscience were at odds with the majority of his district at the time. Supporting the Civil Rights Act of 1957 could very well lead him to being voted out of his congressional seat, but he saw the necessity of leading rather than following on this issue. While this conflict may have turned a few in the district against him, Rayburn's popularity stayed strong, and he ran uncontested in both the 1958 and 1960 elections, showing that while they may have had their differences, the 4th Congressional District still believed Rayburn was the man for the job. Rayburn understood the value of developing relationships. As important as connecting to his constituents was, it was equally important to have connections in Washington. Rayburn's honest, ethical approach to his legislative duties earned the respect of his peers, even those who opposed his ideas. As a result, he rose through the ranks of House leadership quickly, which ultimately provided him with opportunities to better serve his constituency.
As chairman of the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee, Sam Rayburn oversaw the introduction and passage of several key pieces of New Deal legislation. Rayburn's hard work and support of the president's program was rewarded by a number of public works projects being designated in areas of Rayburn's congressional district. The projects were beneficial in two ways: improve the overall infrastructure of the mostly rural area and offer employment to thousands who were suffering the economic effects of the Great Depression. The Works Progress Administration carried out public works projects in 6 of the 7 counties in Rayburn's district: Collin, Fannin, Grayson, Kaufman, Rains, and Rockwall. Rayburn was influential in getting the projects assigned in his district, but discovered that several of his constituents had been turned down for jobs. When Rayburn called the Dallas district administrator to inquire about the situation, he met with some resistance. Immediately following the call, Rayburn called Harry Hopkins, a member of the Roosevelt Brain Trust, who oversaw the program at the national level. "He has all my district, and he has not hired any of my people," explained Rayburn. "I told him if I did not get a list of people by 3 o'clock, he was fired. Now, are you going to back me up, or am I going to Roosevelt?" Hopkins backed Rayburn, who then worked to guarantee that the majority of workers assigned to projects in his district were people living locally in the area. The WPA projects focused on public improvements and included construction of roads, bridges, and public facilities. In Rayburn's district, many of the roads built were farm-to-market roads, designed to make it easier for farmers to get their crops to market by providing a paved rural highway system. From the initiation of the WPA projects in July 1935 to their conclusion in 1941, projects in Rayburn's district constructed 1,518 miles of road, 1,341 of which were farm-to-market roads, and 433 bridges. 58 public buildings were built or improved, many of which were schools or recreational buildings. In addition, 9 parks, 2 swimming pools, 3 stadiums, 3 public utility buildings, and 1 airport were built or improved by WPA workers. Farm-to-market roads proved to be so beneficial in easing the difficulties of rural travel that in 1945, the Texas Highway Commission authorized a 3-year pilot program for the construction of 7,205 miles of farm-to-market roadways, with costs to be equally shared by the state and federal governments. In 1949, legislation passed formally establishing the farm to market road system and appropriated funding for the creation of an extensive system of secondary roads to provide access to the rural areas of the state of Texas.
It's likely that most of Rayburn's constituency weren't immediately impacted by most of the New Deal legislation he sponsored, but there was one key proposal that had the potential to completely transform their lives. In 1936, Rayburn co-sponsored the Rayburn-Norris Rural Electrification Act. Using the power granted to him in the Emergency Relief Act of 1935, President Roosevelt established the Rural Electrification Administration with the goal of providing electricity to rural areas, but the original plan relied heavily on the cooperation of private utility companies. The Rayburn-Norris proposal outlined a program encouraging farmers to come together and form nonprofit cooperatives. These co-ops would then apply for loans from the REA to build electrical lines, later repaying the loans through sales. At the time of the bill's passage, only 2.3% of farms in Texas had electricity. Rayburn believed electricity would transform the lives of people living off the land, and the Rural Electrification Act made rural electricity achievable. Rayburn often said, "I want my people out of the mud, and I want my people out of the dark." Paved roads, especially farm-to-market roads, and rural electrification achieved both. Many farmers in Rayburn's district faced an ongoing struggle with soil erosion. The black soil of the region was initially so fertile it could grow almost anything, but most of the land had become worn down after years of planting only one crop. And although the soil was fertile, it was thick like clay and didn't absorb water easily. The soil composition combined with the rolling hills of the terrain usually resulted in the topsoil washing away, leaving the land agriculturally useless. Rayburn supported federal soil conservation programs and argued against those who wanted to reduce the amount spent on such programs. In May 1935, President Roosevelt created the Resettlement Administration, an agency designed to assist rural and urban families struggling with the devastation of the Great Depression. In Rayburn's district, the RA administered 2 land utilization projects in Fannin County, Lake Davy Crockett and Lake Fannin. The projects were designed to restore agriculturally exhausted land while also providing employment. The 355-acre impounded Lake Crockett was built just northeast of Bonham, between Sandy Creek to the north and Dixon Creek to the south. Planning of the Lake Fannin Organization Camp began in 1933, and in an attempt to stop soil erosion, an existing lake was drained before construction of the dam for a new, larger lake began in early 1936. The entire complex was completed by January 1938. Over 400 workers were employed for the project, all of whom were hired from the Fannin County relief rolls. Lake Fannin was the first RA project of its size in the United States, and the only one of its kind in Texas. The Civilian Conservation Corps administered a similar project, developing Bonham State Park with landscaping designed to control soil erosion and constructing a dam to create a 65-acre lake. The CCC also built the park's entrance, concession, and waterfront storage buildings, a pavilion and dance terrace, bridges, culverts, and a water tower, as well as picnic tables, barbecue pits, and water fountains.
As a farmer himself, Rayburn was always conscious of projects that would benefit farmers. For years, those with property along the Red River came to him with concerns of how devastating floods destroyed buildings and livestock and washed away crops. Rayburn began his campaign for Red River flood control in 1930, but it would take years of promotion of the project, initially known as the Red River Dam, before President Roosevelt confirmed funding for the project during a campaign stop in Denison in 1936. However, it wasn't until the passage of the Flood Control Act of 1938 that the funding was formally authorized. The U.S.'s entry into World War II threatened the project's progress, but the plan was for a rolled earth fill dam, which meant it wouldn't use materials like stone, concrete, or steel that were earmarked for the war effort. Built by the United States Army Corps of Engineers under the direction of Lucius D. Clay, construction of Denison Dam cost $54 million. German POWs participated in building the dam, clearing the trees and building drainage ditches around the site. The dam was completed in January 1944 and was the largest rolled earth fill dam in the nation at the time. Originally designed to control flooding along the Red River, Denison Dam and the resulting reservoir, Lake Texoma, also served to provide hydroelectric power once generators were installed in 1949. Likewise built to prevent seasonal flooding of the East Fork of the Trinity River, Rayburn supported the construction of the Lavon Dam, about 10 miles southeast of McKinney. Work began in 1948, and the dam was completed in 1953. The resulting lake promoted development in the surrounding areas. In 1962, congressional approval was given to modify the project to increase water supply storage due to increased demand in the area. The modifications also added recreation as a general purpose and resulted in development of the land for public use and recreational activities.
As World War II went on, a number of federal agencies began preparing for the nation's possible entry into the war. Among them was the Civil Aeronautics Administration, who looked to establish pilot training schools across the country. Rayburn succeeded in securing 4 flight training schools in his district: Perrin Army Airfield, just north of Sherman, the Bonham Aviation School at Jones Field, Terrell Aviation School, about 40 miles east of Dallas, and Majors Army Airfield, located just southeast of Greenville. In April 1941, Rayburn notified Hunt County officials that the city of Greenville was chosen as the site for the new $5 million Army Air Force training base, which would house up to 4,000 people and 300 planes. Construction started immediately on the base and 3 auxiliary airfields, and the base began initial operation on June 26, 1942. The base became fully operational 6 months later and was officially dedicated and named Majors Army Airfield in honor of Lieutenant Truett Majors, the first Hunt County native to die in World War II. In addition to Army Air Corps pilots, the base served as a major training facility for the Women Army Corps, as well as British Royal Air Force pilots and Mexican Air Force pilots. The base was deactivated after the war on July 15, 1945, when the city of Greenville took ownership of the site. During the war, British Royal Air Force officials looked for opportunities to train pilots outside the country where they would be safe from enemy attack. Under the provisions of the Lend-Lease Act, the United States provided 6 civilian flight schools dedicated to training British pilots, the first being the #1 British Flying Training School in Terrell, Texas, opened in June 1941. In order to maintain the appearance of American neutrality, the property was officially leased to Major William Long of Dallas, a civilian flight school operator. In addition, the Royal Air Force cadets were officially decommissioned in Canada, traveled to Texas to train as civilians, then returned to Canada where they re-enlisted before flying back to England to join the war. Once the U.S. entered the war, the school began training Army Air Force cadets as well. The site was deactivated in September 1945 and turned over to the city of Terrell.
In spring of 1941, Judge Jake J. Loy visited Washington, D.C. to discuss the possibility of having an Army Air Corps basic flying school built in Grayson County. Shortly after his visit, Judge Loy and the Grayson County Commissioners secured a tract of land suitable for a flying field. Construction began on the Grayson Basic Flying School in June 1941, and a lease was signed with the U.S. government a month later, authorizing the training of Army Air Corps cadets. The airfield was the first flying school to be operational following the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. The facility was renamed Perrin Army Airfield in January 1942 in memory of Lieutenant Colonel Elmer D. Perrin, a native Texan killed in a crash while testing a new bomber plane. In 1943, the War Department activated the 32nd Flying Training Wing at Perrin. There were 4 auxiliary airfields to support cadet training: Gibbons Field, about 9 miles west of Sherman; Gaskin Field, about 20 miles southwest of Sherman, near Salina; Gainesville Field, which became Gainesville Army Airfield in April 1944, and Burton Field, approximately 20 miles northeast of Sherman, near the community of Ambrose. More than 10,000 pilots were trained at the facility from 1943 to 1945. Perrin Army Airfield was deactivated after the war, but reopened as Perrin Air Force Base in 1948. On June 25, 1941, Secretary of War Henry Stimson approved a flying school at George Jones Airport, an airfield that was serving as the Bonham City Airport. Construction of the new hangars and runways began on July 1st, 1941, and were completed by mid-September that same year. The first cadets arrived on October 1, 1941, and the Bonham Aviation School was officially dedicated a month later. Speaker Rayburn attended the ceremony as the main speaker. The school was a civil contract flying school, providing elementary flying training under the control of the 302nd Flying Training Detachment. Over the next few years, more than 5,000 pilots received instruction at the Bonham Aviation School. In October 1944, the Army deactivated the pilot training program, and the airport was eventually returned to the city of Bonham.
As World War II came to an end and servicemen were discharged, the number of veterans significantly increased. Approximately 16 million World War II vets joined the nearly 4 million World War I veterans already being served by the Veterans Administration. At the time, the VA operated 97 hospitals nationwide, but it quickly became apparent that more were necessary. Within 5 years of the war's end, 2 new VA hospitals opened in Rayburn's district. Originally opened as the Ashburn General Hospital, an Army medical unit, the 500-bed hospital was declared surplus to the needs of the Army in December 1945 and transferred to the Veterans Administration in January 1946. The facility opened as the Veterans Administration Hospital McKinney in May 1946 and was a typical World War II hospital. It comprised 100 buildings on a 266-acre tract. By 1949, the hospital had 620 beds used for the treatment of general medical, surgical, and tuberculosis patients. In 1950, it was one of 8 VA hospitals in Texas. Originally scheduled to close in 1955, the hospital continued to operate for another decade before its closure on August 2nd, 1965. At the time, it was the only World War II type hospital still operating in the United States. In 1943, members of the Bonham Chamber of Commerce and other interested citizens sought to secure the location of a Veterans Administration hospital in the city. On July 9, 1948, a groundbreaking ceremony was held near the site of the original Fort English. Sam Rayburn served as speaker at the event. The facility was planned to provide general medical and surgical treatment and nursing home care for veterans. The hospital, directed by D.L. Bell until 1955, admitted its first patient on November 1, 1951, and was formally dedicated on November 11th. The facility was one of only two in Texas that provided beds to homeless veterans.
The boundaries of the 4th Congressional District have changed since Rayburn's time and now includes 18 different counties. However, these district projects remain as tangible evidence of Rayburn's commitment to his district over his 48-year career. Lake Texoma and Lavon Lake continue to supply water to cities across North Texas and provide flood control, as well as serving as some of the more popular recreational sites in the area. The wooded areas surrounding Bonham State Park, Lake Fannin, and Lake Crockett have been essential in stabilizing the worn-out soil in those areas, preventing erosion and damage to the land. While many of the structures built by WPA workers are no longer standing, most of the roads and bridges are still in existence, especially the farm to market roads, which account for over half the mileage in the Texas Department of Transportation system. FM roads are the largest secondary highway system in the country, with 3,550 designated routes. Similarly, the network of electric cooperatives has continued to grow and now provides power to over 56% of the nation. 3 of the 4 facilities used for flight training schools now operate as municipal or regional airports in Terrell, Bonham, and Sherman. The 4th, Majors Army Airfield, now operates as L3 Technologies, performing aircraft modification. In 1966, the Veterans Administration Hospital in McKinney became the McKinney Center for Women and is now a North Texas Job Corps facility. In 1973, the Bonham VA Hospital was renamed Sam Rayburn Memorial Veterans Center. The facility has continued to expand its services, providing general medicinal and psychiatric care to veterans in an area covering 4 counties in northeastern Texas and 2 counties in southeastern Texas.
And now we have time for some questions. Remember, to ask a question, simply type it into the Q&A window and we'll try to answer them as they come in.
Okay, I see that we have a few questions that have come in. The first one asks, is it true that Sam Rayburn never married and lived with his sister in Bonham? And no, that is not true. Sam Rayburn did get married, 1927. He married a woman whose name is Meets Jones. That's Meetz. I'm fairly certain that was a nickname, but that's the only way we know her. But they were only married for a very short period of time. They were married and went to Washington, and about 3 months later, she came back to Texas and the couple was quietly divorced. Mr. Rayburn never remarried. And so his sister, Miss Lucinda Rayburn, never married, and she served as his hostess. So I believe that's most of the images where you're going to see Mr. Rayburn attending events. He is going to have his sister, Miss Lou, with him. He did not have no children came from his very brief marriage. So he was married, but he had no children. We also have a question about how the British airmen came for training. They flew into Canada, of course, British Canada at the time. They flew into Canada and they were decommissioned from the Army. They traveled to Texas as a civilian. They were trained in Texas or other British flying schools across the country. They were all trained as civilians. And then when their training was complete, they went back to Canada, where they re-enlisted in the British Air Force and then returned to Great Britain to participate in the war. But they only had to do that until America entered the war itself. So the decommissioning and training of civilians was in an effort for the United States to remain neutral during the war.
Do we have any more questions? Well, if that's it, the webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the Texas Historical Commission's YouTube channel. You will be able to find a link to that video along with answers to the questions we have had in a blog that will be posted soon on the Sam Rayburn House website, which is www.visitsamrayburnhouse.com. If you think of a question later or have a suggestion for a future topic, please feel free to email us. We've got our addresses listed on a slide here in a moment. Don't forget to mark your calendars for the next webinar in our series, which is Sam Rayburn History, Tributes and Honors, which will be held at 2 p.m. on Thursday, October 21st. And the registration link for that webinar will be available soon. We'll hopefully include it in the blog post. It'll also be on our Facebook pages. And we want to thank you again for joining us today and hope you have a great...
I do see that one more question came in as we started on whether or not Speaker Rayburn ever made a public statement about the race riot in Sherman in 1930. And I will say, this is Emma from the Sam Rayburn Museum. I am not aware if he ever made a public statement. I'm not sure if Stacy knows anything, but that would be a question we would need to research before we could provide an answer to you. So we will do some research and see if we can find anything. And by the time the webinar is posted on the blog or on Facebook, hopefully we'll have an answer to that question for you.
And we'll definitely include that answer in the blog post. Oh, here's another one. Are the Bonham historical sites currently open to the public? The Sam Rayburn House is open to the public. We're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we give tours on the hour from 10 o'clock. The last tour is at 3 o'clock. And then Emma, you want to talk about your site?
The Sam Rayburn Museum is currently closed, but we are reopening on Friday, July the 30th as part of the Bonham Quilt Hop. That's a citywide event where we have quilts all over the city that people can tour around. So we are reopening Friday, July the 30th as part of that event. But then we will stay open. So we will be normal operating hours beginning August the 2nd. We will be open Monday through Friday, 9 to 12, and then 1 to 4. So we will be open and operating for tours beginning of August. If you have any questions about that, we also have that information on our website and on our Facebook page.
And since you mentioned Quilt Hop, I'll add really quick that during Quilt Hop, the Rayburn House will have special tours, and they're limited to the rooms that the quilts are in. So on July 30th and 31st, we won't have the whole house open to the public.
We have one more question. It looks like did not come in through the Q&A window. That's how we might have missed it. And it was about Rayburn instrumental in a major change to the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not sure about the Pledge of Allegiance. I do know that he was instrumental because the comment is that this person thinks under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance under Sam Rayburn's leadership. I do know that In God We Trust was added to the US currency during Rayburn's tenure as Speaker. One of the items we have in the Rayburn artifact collection is a full sheet of dollar bills that was when it was first printed with the words "In God We Trust" on there. So I had not ever heard about the Pledge of Allegiance. That would be another item we would need to do some research on, but I am certain about the "In God We Trust" on the American currency.